They say you never truly know someone until they've betrayed you. I didn't believe that until it happened to me. My life was a neatly organized puzzle, every piece in place, everything making sense. Or so I thought. What I didn't realize was that someone had already started dismantling it, piece by piece, right under my nose. Sarah and I had been married for 7 years. 7 long years of shared dreams, plans, and what I thought was a deep connection. We had the house with the white picket fence, 2 kids who were the light of our lives, and the kind of life that others envied. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. But beneath the surface, things weren't perfect. They never are, really. There were cracks that I chose to ignore because that's what you do when you're in love, right? You ignore the small stuff, the tiny red flags that seem insignificant at the time. You tell yourself that everyone goes through rough patches and that things will get better. But sometimes, they don't. It all started with a feeling, that gut-wrenching intuition that something was off. Sarah had been distant for a while, always on her phone, and constantly making excuses about why she had to work late. I brushed it off as stress. After all, we were both busy with work and raising 2 kids. I convinced myself that she was just tired, that we were both just tired, and that we'd reconnect eventually. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It gnawed at me, kept me up at night, and made me question everything. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and Sarah had gone to bed early. I was in the living room, trying to unwind after a long week, but my mind kept drifting back to her. To us. To what we had become. I couldn't take it anymore. The feeling was too strong, too overwhelming. I had to know if it was all in my head or if there was something more. Her phone was on the nightstand, and I felt a sick sense of dread as I picked it up. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I knew I shouldn't do it, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know the truth. What I found shattered me. There they were, messages between her and some guy named Mark. Not just any messages, but ones that dripped with intimacy, with a closeness that should have been reserved for me. They joked, flirted, and made plans to meet up. And then there were the photos, the ones she had sent to him. Photos of her in ways I hadn't seen in years. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My world tilted, and I thought I might pass out from the shock. My first instinct was to wake her up, to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by a mixture of rage, sadness, and disbelief. This was my wife. The mother of my children. The woman I had vowed to love and protect. How could she do this to me? To us? I spent the next few weeks living in a nightmare. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and could barely function. But I knew I had to keep it together for the sake of our kids. I couldn't let them see what was happening. I couldn't let them know that their family was falling apart. During that time, I became obsessed with finding out everything I could about Mark. Who was he? What did he have that I didn't? Why was my wife willing to throw away everything we had for him? It didn't take long for me to find out that he was married to a woman named Lisa. They had kids, just like us, and from what I could tell, Lisa had no idea what was going on. She was living in the same lie that I was. That's when I came up with the idea. It was twisted, I know, but I was desperate. I needed to confront Sarah, but I wanted to do it in a way that would make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. I needed her to understand the magnitude of what she had done. I contacted Lisa anonymously at first. I told her that I suspected her husband was cheating, but I didn't give her any details. I wanted to see how she would react, to see if she would believe me. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. She said she had noticed some strange behavior from Mark but hadn't wanted to believe the worst. It was like hearing my own thoughts echoed back at me. She was just as scared, just as desperate to hold on to the illusion of a happy marriage as I had been. We started talking more after that. I revealed what I knew, and she began to piece together her own suspicions. It was heartbreaking to see her realize that her life had been a lie, just like mine. But it also made me more determined. We decided to meet up, to talk in person, and to figure out what to do next. When we met, it was like looking into a mirror. We were both hurt, angry, and utterly lost. But there was also a sense of solidarity, a bond formed through shared pain. We talked for hours, and by the end of it, we had come up with a plan. It was crazy, risky, and probably doomed to fail, but we were both desperate enough to try it. I arranged a double date. Sarah thought it was just going to be the 2 of us, a chance to reconnect and maybe rekindle the spark that had been missing for so long. But what she didn't know was that Lisa and Mark would be there too. I chose a fancy restaurant, the kind you had to book weeks in advance, because I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted her to feel like we were on the brink of something special, only to have it all come crashing down. The night of the date, I could barely contain my nerves. Sarah seemed excited, which only made me feel worse. She had no idea what was coming, and I almost felt guilty for what I was about to do. But then I remembered those messages, those photos, and the months of lies. She deserved this. She needed to understand the pain she had caused. We arrived at the restaurant, and my heart raced as I spotted Lisa and Mark already seated at a table. Lisa looked anxious, while Mark seemed oblivious, probably thinking this was just another night out. I walked Sarah over to the table, and the look on her face when she saw them was priceless. She went from smiling to confused to panicked in a matter of seconds. "Hey, honey, I thought it would be fun to have a double date tonight," I said, trying to sound casual even though my voice was trembling. Sarah stared at me, then at Lisa and Mark, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't figure out what it was yet. Mark, on the other hand, looked like he had just seen a ghost. He went pale, and his eyes darted between me and Lisa. Yeah, sure," he stammered, clearly caught off guard. "This should be interesting." We all sat down, and the tension at the table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. No one knew what to say, and the silence was deafening. I decided to break the ice. "So, Mark," I started, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "Sarah has told me so much about you. How do you two know each other?" Mark nearly choked on his water, and Sarah shot me a look that could kill. Lisa just stared at her husband, waiting for him to respond. We work together," Mark finally managed to say, his voice shaky. "Really? That's funny," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because Sarah never mentioned you before. And she usually tells me everything." Sarah's face turned a deep shade of red, and I could see her struggling to come up with something to say. But before she could, Lisa spoke up. "Mark, I think it's time you told the truth," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. Mark looked at her, then at me, and finally at Sarah. He knew he was cornered, and there was no way out. "Fine," he muttered, avoiding our gazes. "Yes, Sarah and I have been seeing each other. It started a few months ago, and it was just supposed to be a fling, but I don't know, it got out of hand." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at me, pleading for forgiveness. But all I felt was cold anger. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "How could you lie to me for months and make me feel like I was going crazy?" Sarah tried to speak, but I cut her off. "And you," I said, turning to Mark, my voice rising. "How could you betray your wife like that? You've both destroyed everything for what? A fling? Was it worth it?" The restaurant was silent, all eyes on us. The tension was unbearable, but I didn't care. I needed them to feel the shame and guilt that had been eating away at me for weeks. Lisa was crying now, and Mark reached out to her, trying to offer comfort, but she pushed him away. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't get to comfort me after what you've done. I trusted you, Mark. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." Mark hung his head, unable to meet her eyes. The guilt was written all over his face, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough to erase the damage he had done. Sarah, too, was in tears, but I felt nothing for her in that moment. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the same person I had fallen in love with all those years ago. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. "You know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to save our marriage. I wanted to believe that we could work through anything, that love could conquer all. But now, I just don't see how that's possible." Sarah reached out to me, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine, but I pulled away. The touch that used to bring me comfort now felt foreign, like the hand of a stranger. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Then why did you do it?" I asked, my voice cracking with the weight of my emotions. "Why wasn't I enough for you?" She couldn't answer me. She just sat there, crying, with no words to explain her betrayal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward silence and half-hearted attempts at conversation. The weight of everything that had been said hung over us like a dark cloud, and there was no escaping it. The meal, once something to look forward to, had turned into a grotesque display of our collective misery. By the time dessert arrived, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself from the table, muttering something about needing some air, and walked out of the restaurant. I needed to get away from the suffocating atmosphere, from the people who had betrayed me and shattered my life. I stood outside, breathing in the cool night air, trying to clear my head. The sound of the city bustling around me felt distant, like I was in a bubble, separate from the rest of the world. I didn't know what to do next, where to go, or how to move forward. All I knew was that my marriage was over, and I was lost. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah came out to join me. Her face was streaked with tears, and she looked more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. But instead of feeling the urge to protect her like I once would have, all I felt was a hollow emptiness. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. But then again, what more could she possibly say to hurt me? The worst was already done. Fine, I said, my voice cold and detached. Let's talk. We walked a few blocks away from the restaurant, finding a bench in a quiet park. The silence between us was deafening, each step heavy with unspoken words. Once we sat down, Sarah took a deep breath, as if trying to steady herself. I don't know where to start, she began, her voice trembling. I know I messed up. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I need you to understand, it wasn't about you. I let out a bitter laugh. It wasn't about me? You're right, Sarah, it wasn't about me. It was about you, and your needs, and your selfishness. You wanted something more, something different, and instead of talking to me, you went and found it with him. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she nodded. You're right. I should have talked to you. I should have been honest about how I was feeling. But I was scared. I was scared that if I told you, you'd hate me, that you'd see me differently. Congratulations, I said bitterly. Mission accomplished. She flinched at my words, and I could see the pain in her eyes. But I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. Do you love him? I asked, needing to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. She shook her head. No. It was never about love. It was a distraction, an escape from the pressure I felt. But I never stopped loving you. Her words felt hollow, like they were meant to comfort me, but they only made things worse. If she loved me, how could she betray me like this? How could she throw away everything we had built together? I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah, I admitted, my voice breaking. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. She nodded, wiping away her tears. I understand. And if you can't forgive me, if this is the end, then I'll accept that. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. For everything. We sat there in silence for a long time, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I could feel the weight of the decision that lay ahead, the choice between trying to salvage what was left of our marriage or walking away for good. In the end, I made the only decision I felt I could live with. I think we need some time apart, I said finally, my voice heavy with resignation. I can't be around you right now, not after everything that's happened. I need space to figure out what I want, and to see if there's any chance of rebuilding the trust you've broken. Sarah nodded, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. We left the park and walked back to the restaurant in silence. I didn't say goodbye to Lisa or Mark. There was no point. The night had ended with everything out in the open, and there was nothing more to say. Sarah and I went our separate ways, her to our home and me to a friend's place. The drive was agonizingly long, the quiet car echoing with the memories of happier times that now felt like they belonged to another life. Over the next few months, the distance between Sarah and me only grew. We spoke occasionally, mostly about the kids and the logistics of our separation, but the conversations were strained and painful. The love that had once bound us together now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a wall of hurt and mistrust. Lisa and I kept in touch as well, though our conversations were just as difficult. We were both trying to navigate the wreckage of our marriages, to make sense of the senseless, and to find a way to move forward. But the connection we had once shared began to fade, the bond of mutual pain no longer enough to sustain a friendship. Eventually, we drifted apart, and I heard that she and Mark had started going to counseling. I didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer any. We both had our own battles to fight. Sarah and I tried counseling too, but it felt more like going through the motions than a genuine attempt to fix things. The therapist asked us to dig deep, to confront our feelings, but every session felt like opening old wounds. I could see Sarah trying, could see the guilt eating away at her, but for me, the trust was too broken, the pain too fresh. One day, after a particularly grueling session, I realized something: I wasn't healing. I was stuck, replaying the betrayal over and over in my mind, unable to let go of the anger and hurt. And I knew then that staying in this marriage was only prolonging the inevitable. I filed for divorce the next week. When I told Sarah, she broke down, pleading with me to reconsider, to give us one more chance. But I was done. There was nothing left to salvage, no love left to cling to. The marriage had died the moment I found those messages on her phone, and no amount of therapy or time could bring it back. The divorce was messy, as they often are. We fought over everything: the house, the finances, custody of the kids. It was a bitter, drawn-out process that left us both emotionally drained. And when it was finally over, I felt nothing but emptiness. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far enough away to avoid running into her or Mark but close enough to be there for the kids. I threw myself into work, trying to bury the pain in the routine of my job, but it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. The kids were the hardest part. They didn't understand why mommy and daddy couldn't be together anymore, why they had to split their time between two homes. And every time I looked at them, I was reminded of the life we had lost, the family that had been torn apart by one selfish act. Years passed, and life moved on, as it always does. I started dating again, though it was more out of a desire to fill the void than any real hope of finding love. I met women who were kind, funny, and attractive, but I never let them get too close. The fear of being hurt again was too great, the scars from Sarah's betrayal still too raw. Sarah, I heard, started seeing someone new after the divorce. It didn't surprise me. She had always been good at moving on, at finding someone else to fill the gaps. But I didn't care. She was no longer a part of my life, no longer someone I thought about except when the kids brought her up. And yet, despite everything, there were moments when I missed her. Not the woman who had cheated on me, but the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had made me laugh, who had shared my dreams and plans, who had once been my best friend. But that woman was gone, and all that was left were the memories and the pain. In the end, I learned that betrayal isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to live with, a scar that never fully heals. And while life goes on, it's never quite the same. The trust you once had, the innocence and belief in love, they're all tainted, forever colored by the betrayal that shattered your world. So, if there's one thing I can say after all of this, it's that sometimes, there are no happy endings. Sometimes, the damage is too great, the wounds too deep. And all you can do is pick up the pieces, try to move forward, and hope that one day, you'll find a way to live with the scars.